Thank you, Chairman. I'll just give you a brief introduction because most of my introduction will be covered by what's in the report. The protocols attached to Appendix 1. The report is just seeking to provide clarity and give us a prescribed protocol. And the elements of that protocol are taken from councils elsewhere in Lincolnshire. It's just so that we've got something written in the event that anyone did want to bring any nominations for an alderman or alderwoman. So I don't intend to go any further than that, Chairman, unless there's any questions, of course.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Over to the committee for any sort of comments or questions on this. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this proposal. I think I mean, we don't actually need a procedure, but it's healthy to have one. There is a right within the Constitution at the moment that we can confer the status of older man or older woman onto former councillors, and we also have the Act, the 1974 Local Government Act, which I think abolishes aldermen and older women, but introduces honorary aldermen and older women. So it's a purely kind of an honorary. There is no financial reward. There is no responsibility that goes with the role, but it's a useful way of recognising people's services. You might remember that at full council, the one before last, I proposed that this might be a solution for people who are unable to continue in the role as councillors through ill health or any other reason, as a way of acknowledging gratitude for the service that those councillors have offered over many years, often decades, of good service to the council. As you know, people spend a lot of time, a lot of heartache, a lot of effort, and sometimes a lot of their own money on performing the role of a councillor over decades. And so I think it's fair for the council to reward that commitment, that public commitment in a public way, and certainly I would encourage its use. It might also mean that some people who feel that they don't want to let down the community by standing down might feel that it's a route out, because we do have some councillors that have been here a very long time, and probably it would be fairer to them to allow them to retire. But with this kind of slap on the back and good, well done, good and faithful servant, please continue to have the respect that you would have if you were a councillor. My only nitpick with the proposal is somewhere it says that the valid request must be received within 1 year of the retirement. Have I got that right? I can't find the. Within a 5-year period. On background part 4, a 5-year period, I'd like to suggest that be a 6-year period. And the reason is that we have electoral cycles of 4 years, and it means that somebody who retired or failed to be re-elected in a particular year, let's say the year 2000, they might try again to be re-elected in 2004 and fail again. And at that point, they might think, right, I've had it with politics, I'm not doing any more. But that's a busy time for a new administration. So I think to give people 2 years into the next administration makes it slightly easier for people that have either been forgotten or couldn't get there. So yeah, with your indulgence, I'd like to change the 5-year period to a 6-year period.
I think that's an eminently sensible suggestion, actually, and I think you've outlined some very, very good reasons why. Actually, I mean, I've got no potential objections to change that to 6 years, unless Alan Robb.
Sorry, Chairman, just that neither James or I are sure whether that's possible or not legally. So Councillor Baxter's obviously done some research on this, but subject to us kind of getting that research done and ensuring that it is 6 years, I don't see any problem with doing that. But if with your permission and Councillor Baxter who suggested it, if we take the time between now and these recommendations going to full council to just ensure we're legally allowed to do it.
Yes, fine. I think so. Yeah, I think because I think Councillor Baxter's outlined actually, you know, if a councillor does try to restand and then potentially potentially city members have only got a year, and as Councillor Baxter said, our first year is often quite busy, just allows a little bit more flexibility. So if the rest of the members of the committee are happy with that, I'm quite happy to change that to 6 years. I'm getting Councillor Mills, do you want to speak?
No, I was just going to say, I think that's eminently sensible as well. Happy with that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll change that to 6 years then, subject to advice from Councillor Ian Stokes.
Yes, I think it's a good idea, 6 years, but is 6 years long enough?
That's a very good question. I think potentially we can suggest 6 years and see how it goes. And then if we do find that 6 years isn't long enough, I'm guessing this matter could come back to a future Constitution Committee if there are any issues. I think we've got to suggest an initial time frame, but obviously with a caveat that if 6 years isn't proven to be sufficiently long, then it can be revisited in the future. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Could I ask the cabinet member's not here, but could I ask the report authors? He's not here either. Sorry, do we know why we put in a time limit in the first place? Do we need a time limit at all? I tend to agree.
Has any officers got any things to say on that? Alan Robinson.
Yeah, so the reason it's in there is that that's kind of to write the report. We did some research across the other districts, and this was typical. I am unfortunately in a position where I don't know the answer as to why the first one put it in as 5 years, Councillor Baxter. And as I said, we'll take it away and we'll have a look and see if there are any legal limits or anything like that, whether it's just practicalities. So that, you know, there's a point where people aren't eligible. And if that's 5 or 6 years, that's not a problem for me. But I do think forever is probably a difficult one to administer, because at some point you'll get somebody that nobody in the council knew.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Yeah, I think tempted. We'll leave it at 6, but obviously we can see how he runs, and if necessary, we can in the future we can always amend that accordingly. I mean, my comments on this, I think, as Councillor Baxter said in his comments, you know, the ability to do this was already in the Constitution. For me, this document actually outlines what the procedure would actually be, you know, with the establishment of the honours working group, which I think that's really important, because I think it just puts a little bit more flesh and bone onto what's already there. I'm happy to propose that we accept this paper with that amendment of 5 years to 6 years. Have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Griffin. So if it goes to the votes, so all those in favour, please indicate. And I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Can I just come in and say sorry, apologies for being late, but I was waiting for a workman that haven't turned up, so I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Griffin. It's good to see you this morning. So now over to agenda item 6, which is proposed amendment to planning procedure rules. And I believe this is in the hands of James Wellborn again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I brought this on behalf of the Cabinet member, but this is the report on proposed amendments to the Constitution, concentrating specifically on the planning procedure rules amendment. As members will know, there was a debate firstly at Constitution Committee in July, following that at full council. The proposals were discussed at full council, but there was one motion to defer the amendment put forward by Councillor Cleaver on the definition of relevant ward councillor, which is contained within the paper. So that's been deferred back to Constitution Committee for you yourselves today to debate on. There's also a second recommendation written into the paper, should there be any further amendments that members have got to suggest to changes to the Constitution. unless you want me to go any further into the paper, Chairman, hopefully that speaks for itself. The minutes as taken at council are contained at part 2. And it's really for councillors to discuss what changes, if any, they wish to make to the constitution at this time. But happy to take any questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, James. And we've also got Emma Whitaker, Head of Planning here as well, to hopefully answer any technical questions that members have got. So I'm guessing views from the committee. I believe that there could be some proposed amendments as well being proposed. I've got Councillor Kenny Mills. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to propose an amendment to the definition of the relevant ward councillor in para 2.4. At the moment, it reads, the relevant ward councillor is defined as a councillor representing those wards which fall inside or adjacent to the planning application. I'm suggesting we change it to the relevant ward councillor is defined as councillors, plural, representing those wards in which a planning application falls or adjacent wards where there could be material impact. I do have explanations for why I'm thinking like this, please. I wanted to ensure that any applications beyond the immediate boundary of a ward, which could have a material impact on the adjacent ward, are encompassed in this definition of the relevant ward councillor. It's not every application in the adjoining ward, it is within a remit. So, for example, proposals which could create noise, odour, or have a visual impact, traffic, etc., could be included. I mean, I think this is likely to involve only a few applications, but does clarify relevant and gives that adjoining councillor status in the planning procedures as a consultee. It also helps support ward councillors to be aware and helps the call-in process, which is now the route for many applications to come to committee, and that's democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mills. Have we got a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Bellamy, are you seconding that?
Yes, I will. But I'd also just like to say, bearing in mind this is a variation of Councillor Cleaver's amendment that was going to council anyway, I suggest that, and I believe that Councillor Mills has discussed this with Councillor Cleaver, and he's quite happy for that to be changed so that we let this go to council. And I believe I did speak to the Nick Robbins, the Councillor Robbins this morning, the cabinet member. I know he has got a few reservations, but if we let this go to council, bear in mind it was going to council anyway as Councillor Cleaver's amendment. So we let it go to council and then we have that further discussion at council or I know yourself this morning had opinions on it, and it gives you time as well to speak to the cabinet member.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Bellamy. I'll just outline my concern. I mean, I'm broadly in support of it. It's the definition of material impact, which is quite a subjective thing. And I'm not entirely sure who would have the say in terms of what would a material impact be. Because somebody might say that X is a material impact, somebody else might say not. And it's that element of subjectivity that who makes that call? Councillor Mills.
Yes, I mean, in planning, there are material considerations, long lists of what is material and what isn't. I don't know if Emma would like to comment on that.
Thanks, Councillor Mills. Yeah, I think perhaps Emma, if you could sort of provide a bit of technical guidance and assistance around that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So there are lots and lots of material considerations determined by the courts and general planning sort of good practice. I think from my professional point of view, the concern for me is the subjectivities you've already identified around who's going to make that decision, what's material in one instance may not be material in another. And actually, by having the constitution phrased more simply, it perhaps allows that discretion to the chairman and the vice chairman to use that discretion under the powers that are already in the constitution, rather than trying to narrow it with what will actually end up being a very wordy piece of text in the constitution. And then the danger there is that we miss something, or make an omission, or tie ourselves up so we perhaps don't apply it consistently. And planning is probably one of those areas where we're most likely to be challenged in the courts, and inconsistency in decision making is an area of significant concern. So I'm not sure that we need to define the relevant ward councillors as being dependent on whether or not there's a material impact that could or could not affect members of that ward. I think we can just allow it to be much more simple and allow it to the chairman's discretion, in terms of my professional opinion. I hope that helps.
Thanks, it does, Emma. Thanks now, because that's really the fears I've got about this subject element coming in. Councillor Milnes again.
Yes, the reason I put the last bit in about material impact was to try and narrow it down, to avoid every application in an adjoining ward coming, being classed as a relevant ward councillor. I think, yes, at the discretion of the chairman and vice chairman, we could put that in. I think that would work as well, and not narrow it down. But I understand, the constitution needs not to be wordy. That's why I didn't put a list of criteria in. I just wanted to avoid it being too wide an area in the adjacent ward. It has to have some limits, and maybe we could consider at the discretion of the chair and vice chair, and leave out where there could be a material impact.
Anybody else? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Not speaking particularly to the amendment, but in general, this whole thing is a solution in search of a problem. You can count on the fingers of one hand, and possibly on the fingers of one finger, the number of times that a application has been called in by someone other than the ward councillor. And I think that one would be the statue outside, which I called in from the Deepings, because it was clearly a hot potato at the time. It was something that concerned everyone in the district. And so when we talk about relevant ward councillors or relevant councillors, I think that every application in every ward is relevant to every councillor. And I still think that every councillor in every ward should be able to call in every application. They don't, because we've got more sense. They don't because generally by consultation with the ward councillor or with the planning officers, it just doesn't happen. The amount of time that we have spent on this, not to mention the £40,000 that we paid Craters to come up with a daft idea, is not worthy of the council, and that's why I think that we should stick with what we had, which was that any councillor could call in any application. That's a real good safeguard, a real good break against limiting involvement. You also have a problem of factors where if you take, not wanting to pick on Councillor Robbins, but in Councillor Robbins' ward, the adjacent ward is also Councillor Robbins' ward. And so if there was some kind of particular family interest or objection or whatever, you're actually limiting the number of people that could call that in for good reason. If it was an application a few doors down from the Robbins household. So I really don't, and I use that as an example. I could also say that the Wootons or the Woods or any other relationship like that. So for me, I think we should go back to where any councillor could call in any application. Having said that, we need to be very careful about the wording, and the wording that was. I can't keep up with the ones that are coming in, but it needs to be that the ward next to the ward in which the application is, not a ward which is adjacent to the application. Because as I think I've said at a previous meeting, if there was an issue around, say, the Deeping School or the Deeping Leisure Centre, which are well into Deeping St James, there would be a potential impact on a lot of residents in Market Deeping. So I would want to call that in, whether or not it was contiguous to the boundary or well within the following ward. And I think that in terms of the adjacent ward, I think contiguous ward is a more accurate description.
Thanks, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Mills was next.
Yes, I think I'm right in saying that elsewhere in the protocol, there is the right of every ward councillor to call in any planning application. I think this is more about the relevant ward councillor being notified or aware or able to speak on behalf of their residents in a more formal way than just being the next ward councillor. But there are examples where maybe the ward councillor isn't conducive to looking into it because it doesn't impact on their ward, because it has the impact on another ward, particularly in rural areas. And then you've got a bit of an argument going on. If the relevant ward councillor is stated in the Constitution quite simply to have a notification, to be made aware, to be given that status, that just clarifies it for those applications which could be missed otherwise if somebody doesn't really recognise that it's come in. For example, there's only 21 days to call in an application. So that's why I think it needs to be in this bit, but it doesn't take away from any ward councillor's right to call in any application.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. Councillor David Bellamy.
Just getting back to what Councillor Baxter said, I'll explain in a minute about any ward councillor can call in any application, and that's, to be fair, why I brought my amendment forward too, because I think there's a lot of confusion and probably misinformation as well about it, probably through ignorance of, like I say, the three documents that make up the planning protocols. Getting back to what Councillor Milne said, I'd just like to know, is she in agreement that the bit where it says the material impact is replaced by the chairman's discretion?
I think that works when you've got a chairman and a vice chairman who are actually looking at the weekly list all the time and having an antennae up as to what's what. And that would work. It does put a lot on the chairman and the vice chairman to pick up a problem in the adjacent ward. It's not an easy one to untangle, I don't think. But I do think it's important from my experience of certain things that the adjacent ward councillor is broadened from just being the boundary of the planning application, which is normally then would be the boundary of the ward, and 2 or 3 fields away, it doesn't count.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Mills. I think Councillor Belly wants to come back, and then I'll bring in James.
Just for clarification, just from Councillor Mills, now at present, the ward councillor gets sent out a specific notification. So every week the weekly list comes out, but if there's an application in your ward, you get a separate email with that application, a notification on it. And presumably everybody's picked them up coming through for their wards. Now, are we asking for this to be used as a definition for who receives those notifications, those specific notifications for that particular application?
I just Councillor Mills, I'll just call in James Wellborn. I think he's got some hopefully some technical help for us. Thank you.
Just wanted to come in quickly, Chairman, because as I understand it, what was debated at council and what was moved and seconded by Councillor Mills was relating to the speaking provision of the Constitution. So the right for councillors to speak at planning committee. I think we strayed into areas of calling, which of course you can debate following that, but the motion that's been put on the table relates to speaking and whether we wish to define relevant ward member in terms of speaking. I appreciate there's conversations that members want to have on the call-in process, which we can have, but the motion on the table at the minute is whether we want to specify what a relevant ward council would be in terms of speaking at committee.
Thank you much indeed, James. I think that's very important clarification actually, because it is just about speaking rights. So on that basis, then, I actually think we need to keep this as simple as possible. My own particular view would be to keep it really simple, so there's no elements of subjectivity at all. That the wording is the relevant ward councillor is defined as councillors representing those wards in which a planning application falls or adjacent wards. There is then no element of subjectivity in this at all. If this is just about rights to speak at planning committee, then potentially, okay, it might take away the discretion of the chair and the vice chair. But the reality is, would any councillor in an adjacent ward speak on every single item in that ward? I think they would be interested in the major issues, but a major issue in a ward might not be covered by material considerations. I think Emma, I think you've got some. I'll come back to the councillors, but I just want some technical guidance because I'm trying to work my way through this as well. And I'm increasingly coming to the view that this is too complex potentially to determine here today. And we may have to defer it back so that all the relevant people actually get together and thrash this out. Because otherwise potentially we're going to be here for a long time debating this, and for something that really I was hoping would have been sorted out before all these discussions held. Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think the way I see it is quite a simple one. There's a concern from members that they may be denied the right to speak or the opportunity to speak at a planning committee to address that committee in terms of concerns that may be impacting on local residents. In terms of the Constitution as it's currently drafted, members, if they are the ward member for the relevant electoral ward, and that's the point that we're debating today, have the absolute right to address that committee, and that's in section 5.2 of the rules of procedure. All other members have a discretionary right at the discretion of the chairman, and that's in paragraph 4.1 of those rules of engagement. So I think from a professional point of view, you're probably talking a very, very small number of applications, such as your Stanford North, your Mallard Pass. My professional advice to the chairman always would be this is not a political decision at planning committee. Therefore, if members have got something valid and worthy that they wish to say to the planning committee in terms of making planning points, that the planning committee need to hear, then we should hear those councillors, whether it's under an absolute or discretionary right. That'd be my advice as a professional officer. Obviously, it would be down to the chairman, but I think we need to keep it simple. Otherwise, we're going to lose something in translation. And I'm comfortable with relevant being the ward councillor or joining ward councillor and everything else being at the discretion of the chairman. That's of course my professional opinion. I'm not the decision making, but hopefully that will assist in terms of the committee's decision making process today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. So if I understand it, just this in effect would give the adjacent ward councillor, it would move them from a discretionary right to an absolute right. That's the fundamental crux.
Correct.
Of this, which I actually am extremely supportive of, because I think that it does keep it really, really simple. But obviously I'm very much aware that on this committee they've also got both the chairman and the vice chairman of the planning committee who might have different views on this. Obviously, so but I believe Councillor Bax did have his hand up slightly before. No, Councillor Mills. Sorry, and then Councillor.
Well, yes, I think we've got to the crux of it really. It is to give that adjoining ward councillor an absolute right as opposed to a discretionary right in the Constitution. And if it helps to keep it very simple, that's fine. There was some concern about it being simple because it could mean every application in an adjacent ward. That doesn't necessarily matter. But when it comes to also identifying the relevant ward councillor in terms of notifications and the calling process, maybe that's further on in the scheme of delegation where certain little words could be changed to reflect what this particular definition says in the end. So I'd be quite happy for it to have to full stop after adjacent wards, if we're happy that we don't need the caveats on there and it keeps it much simpler. But I do think it would need to be reflected further on in the calling procedures.
Thanks, Councillor Mills. I know Councillor Sandals had a hand up for quite some time. So Councillor Sandal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a scenario in Stamford. Richard Cleaver is the ward councillor for All Saints Ward, and I'm the ward councillor for St John's Ward. And the Quarry Farm application will infect both our residents. So then, who do you determine is a relevant ward councillor when both sides are going to be impacted on?
I think in that case, if you've got a planning application, my understanding is if there's a planning application that and the development is literally across 2 or 3 different wards, all of those would be the relevant ward. Emma, I know you're nodding your head at me, and then after Emma, Alan.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Chairman. You've got to allow a little bit of discretion in that instance. But I think, Quarry Farm's actually going to be determined by Rutland. It would be the Stamford North side of it when that comes before this council. In all likelihood, they're the sorts of applications that will come to committee one way or another anyway. But those applications have the ability to impact the whole of Stamford. So I think it's only fair that all councillors, all wards become the relevant ward in that particular instance, but you can't define it in any other way than just using that judgment at that time. But if they're both adjacent to the boundary, then they're both adjacent to the boundary, and it means you've got many councillors potentially. And I know, Chairman, you had a similar example at Barrowby where you've potentially got 3 or 4 wards that would be adjacent, and the same would apply. If all of those ward councillors wish to speak, then that's what would happen.
Thanks, Emma, for clarifying that. Alan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so just to clarify where we are in the debate, Chairman. So we had Councillor Mills made a proposal that was seconded, which you've suggested an amendment. So we're at a point where it feels like Councillor Mills has accepted your amendment to her original amendment. Is that fair? You've made that, you've accepted it.
Yes, I have. The reason being is I wanted to get this away from it just being on the application boundary, so if it had a wider impact. So I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Councillor Bellamy seconded Councillor Mills. Are you also happy with that?
Yes, can I just ask one more question though? At the minute, if an application is coming to committee, the ward councillor will get sent notification to notify them that if they want to speak, that they need to contact Democracy. Does this also mean then that in this situation that the adjacent ones would get that notification as well? Because that's what it implies. But I think to a degree this bearing in mind we were confused about what the amendment was between speaking rights and calling rights. I think to a degree this does sort of get round what the cabinet members' objection was, because it won't be for every application, it'll only be for the ones that are coming to committee, so that the notifications really will be only for the, for the ones, like I said, the ones that are the few that do come to committee, and not every single planning application. So
Yes, thanks, because I think that that's my understanding. You know, it is going to be those sort of large items. I mean, as Emma has indicated, I've got one potentially at Barrowby, which actually sits in Beaver Ward. It's right on the edge of Beaver Ward. The majority of Beaver Ward's the other side of the A1. The residents will be impacted. Will be mine in Barrowby Gate, and to a lesser extent, those in Arnoldfield Ward, both of which would, technically speaking, under the previous definition, I would only have a discretionary right. But actually, all the impact is going to be on my ward, but very, very little on Beaver at all. So it's those, and it is in those big rural type of seats really, where potentially I think potentially we could have this issue. But I know Councillor Stokes has indicated he wishes to speak. Councillor Stokes.
Well, it seems to me that we're going round in circles here, and what is really on the table is now back to what the original point is in 2.4. I think we ought to move on to vote on that.
Thank you, Councillor Stokes. Councillor Milnes.
Yes, there is a difference between this and the original motion. It removes whether the adjacent ward is actually on the boundary of the planning application to a much wider remit.
Yeah.
And also it can be smaller applications that can have an impact, particularly in a rural area. So for example, an application for some noisy sports 3 fields away from your ward boundary might have the most impact on the adjacent ward than it does actually on the actual ward. And that is what we're trying to get to, that councillor has an absolute right in those cases.
Thank you, Councillor. James Wellborn.
Hoping I've got the will of the meeting here, but we were amending Councillor Milne's suggestion. So as Councillor Stokes points out, we're almost back to the definition that's in the paperwork. If members wanted to swap that word for adjoin, so can I just check that we're all happy with this wording? And obviously I'll look to Councillor Milnes and Councillor Bellamy if they're happy with this. In the paperwork, I'll suggest a slight amendment. So it's the relevant ward councillor is defined as a councillor representing those wards which fall inside or adjoin to the planning application. I think that's where we were heading, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Councillor Milnes.
Yeah, that is what I'm trying to get away from, because adjoining the planning application means you're on the boundary, and there could be times when it's away from the boundary, and it's just correcting that. It's slightly pedantic, I appreciate, but it does also mean that we're now making it plural, so there's more than one councillor that could be involved in this, as Councillor Sandal has suggested, and also there could be more councillors than just the ward councillor. So it is getting away from the boundary issue and opening it up a bit to the adjacent ward, simply because, as you pointed out, impacts can be felt in the adjacent ward more than in the actual ward. And that is what we're trying to rectify in the constitution here.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Milnes. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. The wording in the second paragraph of paragraph 2.4 on page 23, and that definitely can't stay. I don't know how I've got this far into it, but it doesn't even make grammatical sense. It says is defined as a councillor representing those wards which fall inside the planning application. How can a ward fall inside a planning application? It doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. I agree with you on that. I think the definition that Councillor Milnes has put forward, seconded by Councillor Bellamy, and then amended, actually provides perfect clarity, and I think so. I'm going to propose, because both the proposal and seconder are happy, I'm going to read out what we're going to be voting for or against. The relevant ward councillor is defined as councillors representing those wards in which a planning application falls or adjacent wards. So everybody happy in terms of what we're going to be voting for? Okay. Councillor Baxter.
Just say once again, contiguous is a better word than adjacent.
Thank you. We can see how this goes and we'll see how it works. Right. All those in favour, please indicate. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And thanks for everybody's time in going through this. But I thought it was important that we spend the time on it to get it right. Councillor Bellamy.
Yes, I've got one more amendment, Mr. Chairman. When this originally came to the Constitution Committee on the 18th of July, one of Councillor Cleaver's amendments, number 4, which I've got here in front of me, was relating to the calling process and also the confusion that I'm going to talk about. Obviously, Councillor Baxter just reiterated a few seconds ago. Now, I was the one that asked for this to come back to committee because I didn't think that all the information had been put in the papers in front of the committee for that item to be discussed. When it came to committee, the scheme of delegation was included in the papers, but not the members' code of practice. But some of the detail of the calling process is in the members' code of practice, which isn't obvious in the scheme of delegation. Now, originally, I proposed that if we go to page 31 of our papers, the 6th paragraph down, where any councillor considers that an application not in their ward or adjoining their ward should be referred to the planning committee. So basically this means that any member of the council can call in any application. But unfortunately, that isn't absolutely clear in the scheme of delegation. And like I'm saying, when that came to the Constitution Committee, it was only the scheme of delegation that was in the papers. I think we've been given the scheme of delegation. And if you read paragraph 1 of the scheme of delegation, it does mention the ward councillor, but it doesn't mention any councillor can call in an application. Now, originally, I'd suggested that the paragraph where any from in the members' code of practice was just inserted into the scheme of delegation. Now, speaking to Emma and yourself this morning, Emma, with a professional opinion, was that doesn't sit correctly, if you like, within the constitutional document. So what Emma has suggested is that a paragraph underneath paragraph 1 in the scheme of delegation is put in to refer the member to the relevant part of the code of practice. All very complicated. That's why I think people are very confused. But I think when I'm quite happy for that, for Emma's suggestion to go forward. But when this comes to council, because obviously these amendments will come to council, can I request that the code of practice is also included in the papers with the scheme of delegation, so I can stand up in front of the whole council and tell them that any councillor can call in any application at the discretion of the chairman, just to make it absolutely clear. Because I think even the democracy are confused at the minute, because otherwise they would have obviously have put the code of conduct, the code of practice into the papers for the Constitution on the meeting on the 18th. So I think even they're a little bit confused about the process. So I think it would be helpful if those papers were put into to the papers for the council, so that I can stand up in front of everybody and make it absolutely clear what the process is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Have you got any indication of the wording of that paragraph?
Yes, what it would do in the scheme of delegation, there would be paragraph 1, when the respect of any ward, any application for the planning permission. Below that, there'd be 1A, where it would say any application at the discretion of the chairman and vice chairman of the planning committee in accordance with the local code of good practice. So basically, it is referring members to the code of practice.
Thanks. Could you just repeat that again slowly, because I'm making.
Do you want me to give you the?
Please,
Yeah.
thank you, because I want to be really certain when we take the vote that we've got the exact wording. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Bellamy. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Bellamy's amendment? Councillor Penny Mills has seconded. Do you wish to say anything, comment?
No, I think anything that makes this much clearer to everybody is a very good thing.
Thank you much indeed, Councillor Mills. I've just got one question on this. Obviously, currently, the planning scheme of delegation sits within the Constitution, correct? The code of best practice doesn't sit in the Constitution. It does in the Constitution. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I think that's fine. I was just checking on the technicality of that. I do think actually that it would be really good when this does go to full council, if both, as Councillor Bellamy suggested, that both the scheme of delegation and the code of practice are there, so members can see how the two relate and work together with each other. I think that'd be really useful. So, any members of the committee got any comments or questions on this proposed amendment? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so on that basis, I shall move to the vote. So the recommendation is that underneath paragraph 1 of the planning scheme of delegation, we insert paragraph 1A, and paragraph 1A will read, any application at the discretion of the chairman and vice chairman of the planning committee in accordance with the local code of good practice. Okay, so that's what we're voting on. I'll just move to the vote. So all those in favour, please indicate. And again, I think that's unanimous. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for that. So I think that concludes agenda item 6, because we have given consideration to the proposed amendments, and we have suggested further amendments to the Constitution for consideration, which we voted on, and which will go forward, I guess, to the next meeting of full council for full council approval. So on that basis, I think we're on to agenda item 7, which is any other business, where it's the chairman, yeah, I know. Any of the business which the chairman, by reason of special sickness, decides is urgent. I haven't got anything, but I see Councillor Baxter has got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On most of the other committees of the council, we have a work plan or sort of future actions or that kind of thing. I'm not sure how the agenda of the Constitution Committee is put together, nor how I feed into it. I'm not exactly sure how that's prescribed within the Constitution. And also, if that item were on the agenda, then I would ask that we look at the terms and conditions, or whatever they're called, of the companies committee. Because, as you know, I tried to ask a question at full council of the chair of the companies committee, and it seems to be an anomaly that means that I can't. So I would like the Constitution Committee to look at that but I don't know how to get it on the agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. I think that's a fair point. I think when I took over as chairman of the Constitution Committee, we were midway through the Constitution review, and in many respects, the agendas for the next meetings kind of followed on from all the work we were doing around the Constitution. Obviously, today's agenda has very much been around sort of tying up some loose ends. So I do know going forward, we have discussed previously that the part of the work plan of this committee should be an annual review of the Constitution. But certainly, I think I will sit down with the Emperor Service officers and the vice chairman, and we'll work out a work plan. We'll consider looking at the terms of reference of the Companies Committee. We'll discuss that and see if we can get onto a future work item. Because as I say, I think it's been a challenging time, and in many respects, as I say, we have sort of generated our own work plans and be going forward. But I think now the Constitution is all amended, that we do need a proper work plan. So I'll get that sorted. Alan?
And it's a really good point that Councillor Baxter's made and that you've made about the work plan. But of course, this is a meeting that sits when we've got business, doesn't have a plan of business throughout the year. So actually the way the Constitution sets this out is that these items can be brought by yourself, by me as monitoring officer, by the chief executive, or by the cabinet. So I'm happy to take that forward on Councillor Baxter's behalf as an item of business that we'd like to see as a review of the terms of reference of one of the committees, the Companies Committee. That we can bring that forward to a future meeting. But of course, these meetings don't happen if there's no business. So they're different to obviously scrutiny meetings have that working agenda that they agree normally early on in their civic year. Then it's not like that with this committee. So it's only when there is work. And of course, yeah, we would want to review it at least annually. Otherwise, we'll get to the point where it's out of date like it happened before. So, but yeah, so happy to add that for a future meeting, Chairman. We'll discuss when that is with yourself and put that forward, because it needs to be ready to do it, don't we?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking there's sort of any. I was going to suggest in terms of annual review to kind of do that at the meeting in March time, so that we can sort of prepare something to go to full council of the AGM in May. But Alan, I think potentially, because Councillor Baxter's raised this, waiting until March probably does seem to be a bit of a long time. Potentially, if we have a meeting right about December time, or would January be better? I'm just thinking in terms of how much time you would need to do this review into the Companies Committee terms of reference. Thanks.
So I think to start with, if we aim for the 5th of December, and even if that is a discussion paper at that time, Chairman, if we don't have a chance to have a kind of final recommendations, I think that's worked really well as we've reviewed the Constitution. So perhaps have a discussion topic on that, and then come back with what our final recommendation will be to council later on, if that works for yourself.
Would you be happy with that, Councillor Baxter?
Well, personally, I'd rather have the discussion offline about what the concerns are, and bring back a recommendation rather than kind of spitballing it around for months. Why not bring a proposal? I mean, if it were my thing and I lost, I don't mind that, but I'd rather have something concrete to say. Well, either yes, we should be able to ask questions of the Companies Committee at full council, or no, we shouldn't. Or
yeah, I mean, would a compromise be to sort of push the Constitution Committee meeting from the 5th of December to say early part of January, to just to give a little bit more time to examine these questions? Or I'm looking to officers for some sort of indication as to the sort of time frame they've got in mind to actually bring something concrete back. Thanks.
Chairman, subject to, was been able to have a discussion with yourself and Councillor Baxter about the amendments he proposes. I don't think the 5th of December will be overly challenging. It depends how how complicated it is, and what needs to be changed. If it's about asking questions at council, actually, that won't be the terms of reference for the companies committee. That'll be about the processes for full council, but it doesn't matter where it needs to sit. If that's what the question is about, we just need to probably sit down, talk about it, and then bring something back on the 5th. I'm sure we've got time to do that.
Okay, thanks. On that basis then, I'm probably suggesting that maybe we need to arrange a meeting, probably best to do this face-to-face between the officers concerned, myself and Councillor Griffin and Councillor Baxter, to sort of go through all this stuff and discuss it. If everybody's happy with that.
Sorry, and perhaps the chair of companies.
I think it's a good point. Invite the chair and vice chair of companies as well. Officers.
I don't mind. More the merrier. It doesn't matter to me. That's fine.
Okay, that's fine then. Okay, that's agreed. And then so we can put that in the work plan for December, and then potentially, I'm guessing our next meeting will be around about March time after December, when we will be looking to do the annual review. So it might be the potential we start doing our work in the meantime, and maybe sort of after Christmas, have a meeting and start to sort of see what how things are going, because I know we did say during the review process that with a lot of this these new bits of constitution, we would run with them and see how they work in practice. And if necessary, we can pick them up as part of the annual review process. So if everybody's happy with that, okay, it's 11:37. Declare